Sexual energy is so much more than what most of us understand it to be. I'd like to make the distinction between sexual energy and the experience of sexual intercourse. Largely sex education, what we see in porn, what we might learn from our parents, focuses on the act of sex, reproduction, contraception, disease prevention, but it's rare for anybody to truly address what sexual energy is. There's this experience of talking about intercourse or not having intercourse or how to have safe intercourse, but sexual energy is so much more than that. It's so much more than the experience of sex, and yet being alive and connected to our sexual energy actually takes the sexual experience so much deeper. So let's just step back and imagine you've never heard this term sexual energy before. And I invite you to empty your mind of the preconceptions, the stigmas, the taboos, whatever it is that you've absorbed about sex throughout your life. Just let go of all of that for a minute. Imagine that you know nothing about sex. Imagine that you know nothing about sexual energy. And I'm going to invite you to imagine sexual energy as fuel. Imagine that with each breath you take, you have the possibility of awakening, moving, enlivening fuel that has access to move throughout your body. There's the possibility that when you recognize sexual energy as fuel, that it animates everything you do. It animates the way you communicate. It animates the way you touch yourself. It animates the way you eat, the way you walk down the street, the way you talk with a loved one, the way I present right now to all of you. Sexual energy is fuel. It animates us from the inside. Now, to give you an example that might be a little easier or a little more commonplace for you, imagine your car. Now, imagine your car without fuel in it. So if your car doesn't have fuel in it, you will need to get out and push, and push, and push. It's hard work, right? It's much simpler to drive a car when there's fuel in the tank. And our bodies are like that as well. Most of us spend a lot of time pushing, 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 striving through life, trying to get somewhere, and just operating from here, largely driven by the head, and the head just making the body move and push through life. And this leads to a lot of struggle and pain and disconnect for people. So imagine if you were connected to the fuel in your tank, the fuel in your body that is always there. It doesn't need to come from somewhere else, like the fuel in the car comes from the service station. Sexual energy as fuel is inside of you all the time. And it can be activated by breathing more deeply. Everything that happens in our life comes about because of movements of sexual energy. If we go back to your conception, there was a sperm, there was an egg, the sperm's desire to penetrate, the egg's willingness to open created you. That in itself is an act of sexual energy. We're born of sexual energy. The movement of the baby moving out of the womb and out into the world is an act of sexual energy. And we have so many of these experiences that is the aliveness, the naturalness of our sexual energy. And yet somehow we live in this world where there are so many stigmas, taboos, and ideas that sex is wrong, sex is bad, you shouldn't be sexual, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't feel that, you shouldn't allow this innate aliveness to move through you. So instead of allowing this energy to move through and animate us, we end up living from the mind. We end up living a much narrower and much more shallow experience of this human existence, because we've been conditioned with so many fears about what it means to be sexual. Lots of people walking around suppressing their desires, being afraid of being too sexual or too much or too alive or too shining, or that if they let that energy move through their body, then they're going to experience unwanted attention. The remedy to all of this is to actually allow the sexual energy to move, to allow it to be your fuel, to allow it to animate through your body. Because in that we can give up the pushing and the striving. We can give up the idea of disconnecting from here down and just being this walking head. When people give up the idea of pushing and striving in their lives, that also shows up sexually. There's the possibility that when you relax and fall more deeply into your body, that when you connect with another intimately, then that sexual energy has much more capacity to move, to open, to touch you from the inside out, and then as a result, to touch your partner as well. So there's a mutual experience of going deeper when sexual energy has the capacity to move through the whole body, rather than being limited to something that originates in the mind and moves to the genitals. I run a beautiful couples retreat called Heartfelt Tantra for couples, and just recently we had a couple who during the course of the 3 days gave up a lot of their habitual ways of relating, gave up the energy of pushing and striving and trying to get somewhere. Both the man and the woman fell deeply into their essence during the retreat. And then when they made love on the final day, both of them commented afterwards that it was the most amazing and beautiful sexual experience they'd ever had, because they were being much more in touch with their own inner worlds that supported a deeper connection with each other and greater sensation, deeper experience of orgasm, and touching that element of a deeper satiation, which is about the making love experience, but that quality of making love, that overflows, that goes into the rest of one's life. When we make love that deeply, it does have the capacity to change our lives. What I've seen a lot in working with couples is that women have this longing to open. And a woman lives with this feeling of wanting to open. Sometimes it burns strongly, sometimes it's just a little flicker. But that longing that a woman experiences to open sexually, if she has a sexual experience that just skims the surface, she may have a physical orgasm, but the deeper emotional, feeling, energetic aspects of her have not been touched, then she feels a little disappointed after. And then if that happens again, the next time she has sex, the disappointment will be a little more. And then if it happens again, the disappointment's even stronger. So I often meet women who say they're just not interested in sex. Or I meet men who say, yeah, my partner's just not into sex. However, my experience is that all of those women believing that they're not interested in sex, it's just that they haven't known how to lean into the satiation of that longing to open. They've never experienced a deeper quality of lovemaking, and so then essentially they give up. When the longing to open is met with disappointment, and when that happens one too many times, a woman actually simply gives up. A man's a little bit the opposite, in that a man's desire is to penetrate, and he has this strong feeling of that desire to penetrate. So even if the sexual experience doesn't take him to the depths that he's desiring, maybe it stays in that realm of physical gratification and physical pleasure, a man still has this sense of challenge that arises in him. I want to have sex again to see if I can go deeper. I want to have sex again to see if I can go deeper. And I'm not referring to physically deeper in the sex, but the sense of a man recognizes his own desire for emotional, spiritual, energetic fulfillment through the sexual act. And from having worked with thousands of men, I know there are just as many men who are longing for more from their sexual experiences. Men equally find themselves wanting sex to be somehow a little richer, a little more fulfilling, a little more meaningful. But where a woman's tendency is to give up on sex, a man's tendency is to chase or push for more sex. So we have both man and woman longing, wishing, waiting for a more powerful experience of making love, and yet the tendency for woman to shut down, the tendency for man to chase, means they're often going in the different directions, which is why doing this work of reclaiming our sexual energy on the inside is so powerful. Because when a woman understands that sex is not something she does for her partner, it's something she does for her own vitality, well-being and aliveness, then she moves into the experience of making love with her partner in a very different way. Equally, when the man understands that sex originates in his body, that sex is part of who he is, then he can give up the feeling of chasing and own that potency of desire. And when two people make love from that place, with a woman recognizing the power of sex inside her, a man acknowledging and owning the potency of his desires, making love from that place does transform lives. It's incredibly freeing and liberating. It takes away so much of the stigma, the taboo, the expectation that somebody else needs to be a particular way in order for me to get what I want. Really, the emphasis is back with, if I want a sexual experience, then I own that energy inside of my own body. It starts here so that then I share from a full cup. And so I want to give you a small experience of beginning to feel this energy from the inside of you. So again, stand up, close your eyes, place your hands on your hips, and take some deep breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth. And begin to rock through your pelvis. Inhale, bring your pelvis forward. Exhale, tilt your pelvis back. And as you breathe in, taking full breaths such that you feel your lungs expand, your diaphragm releases down into the belly, and then the expansion through the belly activates your pelvic floor. So that as you inhale on the forward tilt of the hips, you become aware of the pelvic floor. And just breathe into any sensations in your hips, your pelvis, your genitals, as you rock back and forth, taking deep breaths. Also allowing the sigh out through your mouth. This supports the opening of the channels of energy in your body. The sigh of pleasure on the exhale reverberates through the throat and creates an equivalent reverberation through your genitals. Imagine with every breath you're giving yourself permission to wake up your vagina, to wake up your penis, to connect with the aliveness that exists in your genitals, to connect with the power of your sexual energy through this gentle movement and this gentle breath. And gently release the hands, release your hips and your pelvis. And just notice if anything feels a little different in your body. Notice if there's energy, sensations, movement stirring in your body. If there's not, that's okay as well. All of these energetic practices are cumulative. So the more often you do the practices, the more that energy will awaken in you. And just opening your eyes, coming back to wherever you're standing. Maybe take a look around the room that you're in to ground yourself, and noticing if your body feels different in the space right now. This is the first step to beginning to feel your sexual energy from the inside. The practice I've just taken you through, you can repeat this anytime you like and start to cultivate that experience of owning your sexual energy as fuel for your life.